This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety. Afternoon, Kelly, this time.
Yeah. Why are we doing it in the afternoon, Ethan?
Well, that's because I've been sick for the last couple days, as usual.
Are you better?
If it's not sick, it's allergies. So one way or another, I feel like I'm sniffling all the time.
Yeah. So here we are, Friday afternoon. We're gonna do a podcast. What are we talking about today?
I first kind of want to bring up, I've got my alerts here that pop up, and just see it on the news and social media and stuff. And it seems like a common or more common thing that we're seeing is students bringing guns to school. And I think most of us understand the reason why they're doing it, and I think we all can kind of make I think we can all make the educated assumption that they're bringing them to feel like it's going to protect them from something. What that something is, I don't always know, but you could also take an educated guess.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure that people immediately think that. I think people generally jump to worst case scenario and they've been hammered so hard. Their worst case scenario is going to be a school shooting, right?
I mean, and you tell people to think of the worst case, right?
Right, and I do, but
and work your way down.
The other reality is not everything is the worst case scenario, and the reason I say think about what's the worst that could happen is because if you're prepared for that and you understand that, it's easy to de-escalate from there. It may not be simple as in the strict definition of, oh, it's going to be easy. It's easier to start high and go down than it is to start low and escalate. If that makes sense. So if you always start with everything's rosy, our most valuable commodity is time. And if you start low and you think, oh, this is just an accident, and you're not thinking of worst case scenario, you're wasting time, right? But if you think of worst case scenario and then you find out that it was an accident or there was no ill intent or what have you, it's easy to go back there because the time factor becomes less and less important, right? Does that make sense? So I do think it's important that we start thinking about when we find a weapon on or near campus on somebody. I think the first thought should be school shooting, worst case scenario. That's the reason. But then I think through our investigation and our assessment, we should find out what the real reason is. And depending on, of course, where you live and the circumstances in your community and so forth, there are, I'm going to say, a large percentage of those incidences that are likely not ill-intended towards the school, but for the purpose of protection to and from school. So that gets into a whole different discussion, and I think that's kind of where we're going to head to today. Is that right?
A little bit. Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah. So I mean, one of my first questions for you is, if it's not like it's not in school, like they're not bringing it in school, that it's outside of school. So is there any part of that is a school's responsibility to do anything about?
So I'm going to answer the obvious question, but it may not be so obvious to anybody, right? Or to everybody. Yeah. And that is, when we think about schools, we tend to isolate them and put them in this whole little area. And in fact, a lot of what we're doing is, I would say the vast majority of what we're doing to protect our schools is taking actions on the interior of the building.
Mm-hmm.
We're securing access,
Strobes,
we're
door locks.
strobes, locks,
Yeah.
alerting, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, many of the mandates require things like in the language, it requires panic buttons to be able to be located within the building,
Yeah, I
right?
don't know if I see any mandates that are required to be outside, as far as I know.
Yeah, I don't know either,
Not for
but
me, yeah, but
but I mean, ours can, right?
that's what I'm saying. But
Yeah,
okay.
I don't know that people think of that. I think they're so tunnel vision is my responsibility is once those kids get to school.
Hmm.
And when we we talk a lot about the three objectives in a school violent incident, right? Stop the killing, stop the dying, start the recovery, right? Those are your three primary objectives. But what are the expectations of the families and the communities of their schools, right? We talked quite a bit about them, but sometimes they need to be repeated, and I think this is one of those cases. And that is, our communities expect our kids to be able to get to school safely. Once they are at school, they are provided a structured, positive, supportive learning environment, and that once school is over, they are returned home better than when they left. We talked a little bit about this when we talked about bus safety, right? At the time that we talked about bus safety a year or so ago, we touched on the fact that you should consider buses as an extension of your school, right? And for many reasons, because oftentimes you are the provider of that transportation. The bus driver is an employee. The school or the parents place their kids on that bus expecting they are going to get to school safely. The school places those kids on that bus at the end of the day expecting they are going to get home safely, right? So there's this whole, as soon as you do that, you create this obligation to see that they are safe and taken care of to and from school. Why does that differ when they walk,
Hmm.
right?
That's a
So
good
the
question.
obvious question or the obvious answer is the parents let their kids walk to school
Yeah.
without school supervision.
Yeah. That's definitely more of the risk that the parents taking, I think.
You would argue that that risk is still the parents, right?
Yeah.
But it's a community risk. And ask yourself this question: what impacts would the schools have to something if something happened to a child on the way to school? And let's just say something negative. It could be injured, it could be abducted, it could be lots of things, right?
Hmm.
What would
Yeah, I
happen
think that's.
to that school?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's gonna play out totally different if the kid's walking or if the kid's on the bus. Just
Totally different.
with all the politics and news and stuff, it's gonna play out completely different.
But the impacts, the actual end impacts are kind of close to the same,
Yeah, I mean, if kid's getting
right?
abducted, the kid's getting abducted either way. So I
Right.
mean, it's
Or severely injured or worse, right?
yeah.
The question is what obligation does the school have to get those kids to school safely? And if you determine that you have an obligation, how far out does that extend?
Mm,
So these are questions that you have to answer based upon your circumstances, your schools, your community, your neighborhoods that these kids are walking through. And if there's some reasonable expectation that these kids can get to school safely, or there's an expectation that they're going to struggle on doing that, what is the school's obligation to see to it that they get to school safely, right?
mm,
So let's take the circumstance where some of these guns that are being found are not meant for violence towards the school or anybody at the school, but for protection on the way to school. Let's look at it from that perspective. If you think that kids are walking to school safely and that there's no threat to them whatsoever. No bullying, no teasing, no threats of violence, that they're just walking straight to school and everything is peachy keen, right? Everything is just fantastic. A little bit in a bubble.
Yeah.
There, right? So if that's what you're thinking, then you're going to naturally think that that weapon is meant for violence towards the school, right?
Right. You're
Living in la la land, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking like everything's great and you don't think any bullying is occurring or at all, like, yeah, that's what you're gonna think.
That there's no external threat to these children that are walking to school. Then if you do happen to find a firearm or some sort of weapon, either on campus or in possession by the child or what have you, then you're going to think of naturally through that violence. But let's look at the reality. Where are kids most likely going to be threatened with violence? Where are they most likely going to be subjected to bullying, harassment, and these other threats? Where are they most likely is that going to occur? And it's not a location. It's not a location.
When they're in a group of kids that are capable of asserting power over them. Did I say that right?
Sort of.
I was trying to say in a way that I would be right either way.
Yeah, close, but not quite. Where I was getting at, where there's an absence of adult supervision or the potential for adult intervention.
That's true. It's kind of hard to intervene when you're driving a bus.
Right? So, and you have a whole mixture of kids. You have older kids, younger kids, and a lot of, especially these rural areas where you might have 5 or 6 kids that live out in an area that range anywhere from grade school all the way up through high school. Yeah. Right? So you run the gamut because you're not running a high school bus. You're not running a middle school bus or just an elementary school bus. You're running because busing is expensive, costs a lot of money. So you're going to be the most effective as you can, and you're going to pick up whoever's out there and drop them off on the way into the last stop, which is likely the high school or what have you, right? Depending on how it's situated. But if you're talking about kids that are walking or kids that are exposed to other kids of different age groups and so forth, you're more likely to get that bullying. There's a lot of schools that have now, because of issues that are occurring on buses, now have, I'm going to call him a para-educator, but I'm not sure what the actual official name is. It's somebody who's meant to assist the bus driver, to help them manage the bus while they're going to and from school. So there's a monitor, a bus monitor, I guess, is just as appropriate. But there's a lot of schools that don't. When you're talking about kids that have to walk to school, sometimes some pretty good distances. I remember when I was walking, it's completely different now. I get it. But when I was walking to school, even in elementary school, I walked to school, and it was at least a mile for me to get to school. So that's a pretty good distance. And when I first started walking to school, there was a time that I took the bus, but then after I reached like the 3rd grade, I was allowed to walk to school or ride my bike, right? So I'm sure there's areas that still allow that and still do that. But when you're getting yourself to school as a student, now you're exposed to every potential, I should say, between your house and the school. So now you're talking all the age groups, and you might even be walking with a group of kids that all walk at the same time. Some of them may like you, some of them may not. So, but you're also talking about adults that are walking in that area at the same time. Adults that are exercising and just walking the dogs, walking to work, and so forth, or hanging out, causing trouble. So it's important to understand that there is this potential. And if there is this potential, and you think that it's a reality, you have to ask yourself this question. If we believe that kids are arming themselves for protection or for anything else, really, but specifically in this conversation, for protecting themselves to and from school, you have to ask yourself this question. What do you think they're doing with the weapon, firearm, knife, whatever, before they enter the building?
Yeah, they're either stowing it in their backpack or their locker. Who knows if they're keeping it at school in their locker or throwing it in a bush somewhere? I mean, there's a
Right?
whole bunch of different things you could think of for
Stashing
sure.
it,
Yeah.
stashing it. Where would those hiding places likely be for those students who are doing that? In
Anywhere.
close proximity to the school.
Yeah, anywhere from the bus to the front of the front door.
Right? Well, or across the street.
Yeah, if they're
Right?
walking there. Yeah. I was
Yeah.
thinking on the
Or
bus.
yeah, so in somebody else's yard, maybe in a bush. And we've seen articles where
Crazy.
people have found guns on the way to school, or while they were out in their yard, they happened to see something that was shiny in the bush and they went over and found a firearm or a knife or some sort of weapon, right? So what do we do with
Man.
those? How do we prevent that? What kind of activities are we engaging in that helps protect the school? Because really that's kind of what we're talking about. But we're also talking about the expanded definition of what school means.
Yeah, so I'll also bring up that we hear a lot of cases and I read a lot of stuff of school shooting, and then you dive a little bit more into it and it shows that it's actually like just outside the school campus, but it's like really close, or it just involves a kid that went to that school and it gets labeled as a school shooting. And a lot of the times it's this gang versus gang or this whatever versus group of people, whatever it is. So there was one recently in Texas where kids were foolishly just playing around with a gun and it went off and ended up actually killing one of these kids. So really
so
sad.
were they on campus?
They were like just outside of it.
Mm.
So, but he was a sports player on the team there at that school. So, but in the news it got labeled as a school shooting.
Yeah. So
it kind of gives you that perception of like, oh, another school shooting. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I get it.
Not actually the
case. I get why they're doing it. Politics is politics.
Yeah.
But the reality is when you start labeling this as something that it's not to get views, people start to lack or question your credibility, right? But let me, maybe it's time that we walk through the world according to Kelly and definitions of school shootings, right? And so when I got into this, that it was very clear what that definition was. It was a targeted attack on schools for the purpose of creating as many deaths as possible. That's essentially what it was. It has since gone to, because of politics and self-serving agendas, that it has gone to anything that we can attach to a school has now become a school shooting. And the reason I want to clarify the definitions is because when we're talking about or I don't want to say use the word typical, but traditional school shootings, we're talking about kids that have been bullied. They've walked through this pathway of violence that we've talked about for forever on the podcast, and we'll continue to talk about it. But they come into the school and they start shooting the school. But more and more, and we've seen this before statistically, where mass shootings, the mass violence, active violence in schools is really only a small portion of, percentage wise, of all of the shootings that occur on or near a school campus. Now, I'm not saying it's incorrect. It's just that we don't make the differentiation between the different types of shootings. So everyone automatically thinks this when they say we had another school shooting, it's this emotionally troubled child that came in and just started shooting up the school. And many times, like this case, kids were playing with a weapon. I don't know where they got the weapon from. I don't know whose it was or what the intent was, but they're playing around and it accidentally goes off, is what they're saying. Is that a school shooting? It's a shooting that occurred on or near the campus. So I can see the connection, but that's not what the typical definition is, right? And in fact, and we've talked about this before as well. We spend an awful lot of time, money, and effort to present or to prevent the school shootings like we've come to know them, right? This emotionally unstable or troubled child who goes in and just starts shooting everyone and everything he sees. That's what we're trying to prevent. When in reality, the majority of school shootings occur outside the building. Parking lots, across the street, school hangouts, after school hangouts, convenience store, those types. Many of them are gang related and they're retaliation for other acts of violence prior to. So are those the same acts that we're trying to prevent? I don't think so. Right? I don't think, we've had many, and we've talked about several of them, where there was one, where was it? In North Carolina, I think, where there was a stabbing, I believe. It was a stabbing where somebody within the school unlocked a door, and parents of one of the students, they were actually parents from a student from another school, were allowed in the building, and they attacked and stabbed a student at the school. Is that the same thing? I don't think so. I don't think those are prevented the same way. I don't think we have to look at them at the same way. And I think those are much more difficult for us to address, because those are things that are often the result of anger, retaliation, revenge, avenging, those types of things that are more spontaneous than generally what we're seeing in the definition that we've really come to follow. So should we track those? Yes. Should we account for those? Yes. Should we call everything school shooting? I don't think so. I think there's a difference between a school shooting and a shooting that happens on campus.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think it's really helping solve the actual, or one of the actual issues. Like you've been saying, how we prevent a school shooting in the sense of some kid deciding to resort to violence and just do as much damage as possible is really kind of totally different than the more likely instances that we're seeing. So I mean, both can stem from bullying. I think bullying plays a huge part in both. It's interesting that we're talking about this because just a little bit earlier I'm in a few, town groups and stuff, and one of the posts that came up was that this woman was asking for help basically because she noticed her daughter comes home from school like more and more sad, and turns out that she's being bullied, and she's tried going to school and addressing them, and they just like don't help her. And so she's like, what can I do? And she's like, should I just take her out? Should I just homeschool her? It's like,
yeah, there's obviously not knowing, I can't help, right? But
yeah,
to look at, and this is connected to what we traditionally think is bullying, right? Let's see if you can give me my definition of what bullying is. Ethan, right?
Oh, you want me to give it to you right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like your definition of bullying is something like whenever someone is asserting power over another person
for the purpose of
some type of gain,
making them do something they don't want to do.
Yeah.
That they would not do. It's the assertion of power. So is the assertion of power any different in gangs fighting over territory? No.
No.
It's collective bullying, essentially,
Yeah.
right? So they're asserting their power and they're trying to make rival gangs do something that they don't want to do, which is give up their territory or give up their criminal activity stronghold or what have you, right? It's organized collective bullying. That's fundamentally, that's what many criminal acts are, is asserting power over somebody to take or gain something that they don't want to give up. They're not willing to give up. A lot of it is based on the assumption that they're not going to fight for it, or they're going to give up, or they're not going to assert their power back at you, which is they're going to victimize you, right? Does that sound like the first stage of the
Yeah.
pathway to violence? Yeah, right. And we see movies after movie about that, where somebody is victimized, something's taken from them, and they start going on this vigilante spree of violence to get back at those who victimized them,
I mean, all it took was someone going after some guy's dog, and
right?
he just
Or
went crazy.
or kids or wife or what have you. I mean, we could go into a whole litany of movie titles that it is all based upon this. Somebody was motivated by some sort of act of bullying.
There's a lot of
Right.
great movies with that.
Right.
Actually,
Right. And so
it's kind of weird.
but am I wrong in there? Let me ask you that.
No, you're not. No, you're right.
So, because if I am, then I'll have that argument with you. I call that an argument. It would probably be more like a discussion where I would win. But but the fact of the matter is when we start looking and looking at and exploring these acts on the way to school, what we're really doing is expanding the boundaries of the physical boundaries or from the physical boundaries of the school to that area by which you draw your students from, right? Because now we're talking about getting them to and from school. So that includes that whole area and when we do that, we're expanding the impacts and the influence that the schools have on the community, right? And I've told you this story before, but I'm going to tell it to you again so that I can bring it into the context of this discussion. When I went from the sheriff's department to the school safety coordinator at a school district, at the sheriff's department, I looked at schools, I visited schools, I had great relationships with most of the schools within my jurisdiction. But I did it from a law enforcement perspective. I never really looked at the amount of influence and connection that schools had on the community around them, the community in which they serve. And when we went into, well, before COVID, but I remember us having to provide counseling services for a domestic violence incident in the community. Never touched the school. I mean, it was close to a school, but several blocks away. But it was a domestic violence incident that resulted in the death of a parent of one of the teachers that occurred at a party in an apartment complex. And we had to provide counseling not only to the school that was closest to them, but essentially every school within our district, because somebody from that apartment complex went to elementary school, went to middle school, went to high school. And we had 3 high schools. So and we had open enrollment, I guess is what it's called. So we had a kid from every grade level from that apartment complex that went to one of our 3 high schools for different reasons, and several of our elementary schools. So it's not just connected to the immediate neighborhood, it's connected to the community. And if you have something that happens at or within a community, that school often is the first site of refuge, right? So the area where families go to normalize things. And the reason I'm bringing this up is even if you have closed enrollment where the kids from that neighborhood have to go to a particular school, they're still deeply connected to that community. And we had 20 different school buildings in my district in 2 different cities and some in unincorporated areas of the county. So we had sheriff's departments and police departments that were responsible. And now we're talking an area that covered a significant area within our county. And if something happened, it touched everybody. And if you even extend it further than that, you have parents who went to those schools. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because we cannot neglect that connection.
Mm.
And it takes the community, as it takes a village to raise these kids, right? But it takes a village to protect these kids as well. And as we move or advance our offerings for school safety in this field, we have to understand how we connect our schools to the community and how our communities are connected to schools. You're going to hear about this in the very near future. We're going to start hearing about our product that's coming out called Crisis Go Connect and how it connects people, agencies, school organizations, and so forth. You're going to start hearing about that because in my opinion, it's going to revolutionize what we're doing. And we're all excited about it. We're launching it now. And again, I don't want to get into this big salesy thing, but if we're not connecting everybody to show everybody how they can and have to work together to protect our kids, and when I say everybody, I'm talking schools, law enforcement, fire departments, EMS, hospitals, counseling services, everybody who's going to help keep our kids safe. And I mean safe, and not just physically, but emotionally, mentally safe. How are we going to do that? And how are we going to connect which is reason it's called Connect, is how are we going to connect all of those resources together? Not only at the time of an incident, but beforehand and afterwards. How are we going to really work through that entirety of the incident timeline that we've talked so much about recently? There's roles that have to be accounted for. And if we think that there's just a role for the schools, they only have this part of the responsibility, and law enforcement only has this part, and fire has this part, and EMS and hospitals have this part, and we don't ever connect those, and not only not connect them, but if we don't validate them when we connect them, then we're falling way short of the requirement, right? So I think this conversation, when we start talking about expanding our thought processes beyond our schools into the neighborhoods, but we also have to look at what we're doing in our schools to keep our kids safe. How does that impact law enforcement? How does that impact the fire department? And what are they doing that impacts how you keep those kids safe? What are you doing that negatively impacts the safety? Because those kids who don't feel safe going to school, who do you think is going to deal with that? Law enforcement. I mean, fundamentally, Maslow's hierarchy, one of the most fundamental human need is the need to feel safe. And if they don't feel safe, they're going to do something to protect themselves. So we have to address those, whether it's emotional, whether it's resiliency, whether it's capabilities to protect themselves. They're going to do something, and they're going to do something with something that gives them the best opportunity to survive whatever it is they're experiencing, right? So I think it's important that we understand that connection and work through that.
Can't be siloed in our response anymore.
It never could be, but I think it's being realized more and more that we have such a long way to go because our schools are trying to figure it out. I get it. And again, they have to become students of school safety. They can't just say, here's my school safety plan, if that plan hasn't been validated. And the only way that it can be validated is if you are working with your partners who can work with you and exercise and drill with you to make sure that everything is valid. We're in a series right now where we're talking with a partner of our CRG and the maps that they provide. And it's as good as those maps are, if they're not visible to the people who need them, they're just maps, right? They have to be visible. And that's why we partner with them, is because we help make them visible to everyone who needs them. But there's a big difference in the mandate to have a school map than is necessary or should have that same mandate to make them visible to who needs them when they need them. There's a lot of work that has to occur there. And so what I'm saying is we've done that work, right? And so now having that ability to share an operational map that provides actionable data and being able to map out the results of those decisions that you made and operations that have started. Is it the end all be all? I don't think so. But it's a big step in the right direction, I think. I think we'll continue to evolve as things evolve, but that's a huge step for us and this industry. So stay tuned for that. That's coming.
It's going to change the world.
It's going to change the world as we know it. We should have a little superpower guy at Crisis Go.
What, the little blue guys that we have?
Mm-hmm.
Where is he? Where does he go?
I don't. I had him.
You already lost him? You already lost your buddy?
I didn't lose him. I just don't have access to him right now. All right. What else we got on that?
I think that's all I got for you.
All right. So stay tuned. We're gonna really be exploring the potential of this and how we get it into the right hands. So there's going to be a lot of discussions in the near future about where we're headed and why. Yeah, stay tuned. We'll talk next week.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety.